You know, we all like to think of our brains as these amazing supercomputers just rationally processing everything around us. But what if I told you that the machine inside your head is less of a scientist searching for the absolute truth and more of a gritty survivalist, totally willing to bend reality just to keep you in the game? Let's dive into why that is. So let me start by asking you something really simple. Do you, right now, trust your own eyes? Your gut reaction is probably, yeah, of course, but well, by the end of this, you might not be so sure. And that's because we're going to unpack this one core, kind of myth-busting idea. Your brain is not designed to give you a perfectly accurate picture of the world. Nope. Its number one non-negotiable job, hardwired by millions of years of evolution, is way simpler. Just keep you alive. Truth? That's kind of secondary. So, how in the world did we end up with this brain that's so obsessed with survival? Well, it all goes back to its original operating system, which, let's just say, was developed for a much, much more dangerous world than the one we live in today. The software that's still running in our heads is based on something called evolutionary heuristics. The best way to think about these is as mental shortcuts. Rules of thumb that our ancestors absolutely needed to make snap judgments. Was that rustle in the tall grass a saber-toothed tiger, or was it just the wind? There was literally no time to sit and think it over. And this really gets to the heart of the fundamental trade-off our brain is always making. It is optimized for speed, not for 100% accuracy. See, for an early human, jumping away from a shadow and being wrong, that's just a little embarrassing. But hesitating on a real threat, that's a fatal mistake. And that deep, deep bias for fast, good enough decisions is still with us. Okay, so let's see how this actually plays out in one of our most basic functions, perception. We like to think of our eyes as cameras that are just recording the world, but what's really happening is much more like a creative film studio putting a movie together. First off, you gotta understand that the data your brain gets from your senses is, well, it's surprisingly low quality. It's actually full of gaps, blind spots, all sorts of fuzzy information. It is definitely not a high-definition video feed. So what does your brain do with all this messy, patchy data? It gets creative. It actively fills in the blanks. It makes its absolute best guess based on everything you've ever experienced and everything it expects to see. So what you perceive isn't reality. It's a construction, a story woven from a tiny bit of new data and a whole lot of old memories. There's a formal name for this, by the way. It's called predictive processing. Your brain is constantly making predictions about the world, and then it just uses your senses to kind of check if those predictions are more or less on the right track. In a very real way, your reality is a kind of controlled hallucination, guided by your brain's best guesses. This is the exact reason why optical illusions work so well. Your conscious, logical mind can know for a fact that two lines are the same length, but your brain's perception system, it just doesn't care. It will always prioritize making a consistent, believable 3D image over showing you the literal facts. It would much rather tell a good story than stick to a boring truth. And hey, speaking of stories, let's talk about your memory. Because if your perception isn't a camera, then your memory is definitely not a video recorder. It's much more like a creative writer who edits the script a little bit every single time you read it. This is honestly one of the most mind-blowing findings in all of neuroscience. When you remember something, you are not just pulling up a file from a hard drive. No, you are actively rebuilding that memory from the ground up. And in that messy process of reconstruction, things can, and they absolutely do, change. So here's how it works. An event happens, a memory gets formed. But later on, when you recall it, your current mood, some new piece of information, or even just a suggestion from somebody else can subtly change that memory. And here's the real kicker. Your brain then saves this new, edited version as if it were the original. You are literally, without realizing it, rewriting your own past. This quote from the source material just sums it all up perfectly. Our brains desperately want our life story to make sense. So they'll smooth over the rough patches, fill in the gaps, all to create a coherent narrative, even if that means sacrificing what actually happened. It's why our memories can feel so incredibly vivid and yet be completely wrong. Now, this whole thing doesn't stop at perception and memory. It goes right into our thinking itself. Our brain is as a whole toolkit of hidden shortcuts. We call them cognitive biases, to make sense of a really complex world, really fast. Let's look at just two of the big ones. Confirmation bias, you know this feeling. It's that aha, I knew it moment when you see an article that totally agrees with you, and you just instinctively scroll right past the five that don't. And then there's availability bias. That's why we tend to worry more about a dramatic but super rare plane crash than a far more common car accident. The dramatic story is just easier for our brain to remember. And these are the exact kinds of mental shortcuts that modern marketing and social media algorithms are built to exploit. And of course, we have to talk about emotions. They are the ultimate shortcut, right? A sudden surge of fear makes you slam on the brakes long before your rational brain has even started to calculate the stopping distance. Emotions like fear amplify threats, while feelings of pleasure can make us seriously underestimate risks. They are built for fast action, not perfect logic. So after hearing all of this, that our perception is basically a guess, that our memories are totally editable, that our thinking is jam-packed with biases, it's pretty easy to ask, is the human brain just a fundamentally flawed piece of equipment? But here's the twist in the story. What if all of these so-called flaws, what if they aren't bugs at all? What if they're actually features of the system designed for a very specific purpose? You see, these are what we call adaptive trade-offs. The brain's goal was never perfect logic. It's efficient functioning. All these shortcuts are what prevent us from being completely paralyzed by too much information, a state called cognitive overload, and honestly, they help us bounce back from setbacks. Just take the optimism bias, for example. That's our natural tendency to believe that things will probably turn out better for us than for other people. Now, logically, yeah, that's a deception. But the adaptive benefit? It's huge. It's what gives us the motivation to start that difficult project and the resilience to keep going when things inevitably get tough. So, what is the big takeaway from all this? Look, we can't get a brain upgrade. The hardware is what it is. But the solution isn't a new brain. It's awareness. Just knowing that your brain uses these shortcuts, that it tells you stories, that awareness allows you to pause, to question your gut reactions, and to actually engage in critical thinking when it really, really matters. So, your brain isn't showing you reality. It's telling you a story about reality. And now that you know you have this storyteller living inside your head, it really just leaves us with one powerful question. What kind of story are you going to choose to tell?